On the vast ocean, a spindle-shaped submarine surfaced for a short break. Captain Wrangel climbed up to the observation tower and scanned the horizon through his binoculars. The sea breeze was calm and refreshing, but suddenly, the roar of an airplane engine echoed above. Wrangel quickly raised his binoculars and spotted a plane flying directly toward them. He immediately issued an emergency order, "Dive, dive now!" The crew rushed to their stations, executing the dive procedure. They flooded the ballast tanks with water and ran toward the bow to add weight, helping the submarine sink faster. But just as Wrangel was about to retreat, bullets rained down from above. He was hit and fell into the sea. The first officer immediately declared the captain dead and ordered the hatch sealed. The submarine dove deeper, but the danger wasn't over yet. The sonar operator detected propeller sounds from a nearby vessel. The first officer ordered both engines to slow down and took the sub down to 120 meters, tilting the bow downward about 10 degrees. But the sonar operator's face turned grim. The propeller noise was getting louder. "It's a destroyer," he shouted. The first officer ordered another dive, pushing the sub deeper into the abyss. Inside, the air grew tense and heavy. The crew exchanged anxious glances, hardly daring to breathe. Suddenly, the sonar operator yelled, "Depth charges!" A moment later, violent explosions shook the submarine. Depth charges detonated above them. The metallic hull groaned under pressure, and everyone clung to whatever they could, praying silently. Fortunately, the submarine had gone deep enough that the first barrage caused no serious damage, but before anyone could relax, the sonar picked up more propeller sounds and the distinct dropping of dozens of depth charges. Fear gripped the crew. Moments later, powerful underwater explosions erupted all around them. The shockwaves damaged the systems, sparks flew from short circuits, and the sub spun out of control, gauges spinning wildly. The submarine plunged to a depth of 250 meters. The crew prayed desperately as the water pressure intensified. The hull began to crack, seawater gushed in, and despite all efforts, there was no saving her. The warning lights flashed relentlessly, the call of death itself, before the submarine sank into the darkness below. News of the missing submarine soon reached German command. By then, over 20 U-boats had already disappeared. The term missing was merely a euphemism. During World War II, most of those subs were actually destroyed in battle, unable to send any distress signals from the ocean's depths. German officials realized the situation had become dire. New submarines were being built slower, recruitment was difficult, and training required precious time. If things continued this way, they'd be forced to rely on green recruits and war-weary veterans. During a staff meeting, a young officer walked in. Hoffman, newly promoted to captain of U-612, the base commander placed great hope in this new generation, wishing Hoffman would become a great soldier like his late father. It turned out Hoffman's father had also been a U-boat captain, but died in the war. The commander opened a safe, took out a naval logbook, and handed it to Hoffman, hoping he would continue the legacy of heroism. Hoffman accepted it with determination in his eyes, silently vowing not to disappoint his commander's trust. Meanwhile, the crew of U-612 was busy getting ready to set sail, loading torpedoes, greasing machinery, and organizing supplies. Spirits were high, but trouble struck when the radio operator, drunk, spilled liquor onto the communications equipment, causing it to catch fire. It took the crew the whole night to fix it. First Officer Tenstedt, in charge of inspections, found out about the incident but chose not to report it to Hoffman. He looked down on the young captain, believing the command should have been his. To him, Hoffman only got the post thanks to his father's reputation, a thought that fueled his resentment. Late that night, Hoffman made his rounds as a responsible captain and discovered Tenstedt's cover-up. He felt both angry and disheartened, yet something else was weighing heavily on his mind. During a previous mission, a sailor who faced combat for the first time panicked and acted cowardly, resulting in a death sentence. Although Hoffman had nothing to do with it, he still felt responsible for his men and pleaded with the commander to spare the sailor. The commander firmly refused, saying it was the Navy's decision and Hoffman shouldn't blame himself. Hoffman feared that others might think he only got his position because of his father's name, but the commander reassured him, if he truly wanted to end this war, he must never doubt himself. The next morning, before departure, Hoffman personally oversaw the execution. With heavy heart, he pulled the trigger himself. Composing his emotions, he straightened his back and marched to the dock, where his crew was lined up and waiting. Then, he began his speech. He told them they were sailors, which meant not only facing the brutal sea but also the enemy. Inside a submarine, no one could rely on anyone but themselves. This mission was aboard a brand new vessel, a challenge both for the ship and for them. Hoffman urged everyone to stand united, shoulder to shoulder, because only then could they achieve victory. As his speech ended, the crew boarded the submarine to take their posts. When the vessel left the harbor, sailors standing on deck waved goodbye to their loved ones. The sea breeze felt calm and peaceful. For a brief moment, they could almost forget the war that awaited them. The fresh air and warm sunlight soon became a luxury as the submarine left base and headed into open waters. Hoffman gave the order to dive. Once all crew had gone below deck, only Tenstedt remained. Hoffman confronted him about hiding the radio fire incident and reassigning the operator without permission. Tenstedt tried to justify himself, saying the fire had been under control. Hoffman sternly warned, "Don't let it happen again. This is my boat. No matter how long you've served, I make the decisions here." Tenstedt sneered but obeyed, his pride clearly wounded. In the control room, the crew began their dive. Water filled the ballast tanks as the sub descended to 30 meters, bow tilted 10 degrees, stern 50. Everything ran smoothly. Hoffman asked navigator Ehrenberg for their current position. He replied they were heading northeast, 210 degrees from A Coruña, with no new orders from HQ yet. Hoffman ordered training drills to continue, simulating a small vessel moving at 18 knots. Tenstedt suggested a counterattack approach, but Hoffman ignored him and proceeded with his own commands. Prepare torpedoes 1 and 2, seal the compartments, open aft vents, side valves, start flooding. The crew moved swiftly but muttered under their breath, 9 attack drills in 10 hours. He's a damn devil, yet Hoffman believed that only relentless training would prepare them for real danger. When the crew reported torpedoes 1 and 2 ready, Hoffman checked his stopwatch, 4 minutes 20 seconds, unimpressed. Since his goal was under 4 minutes, he ordered them to reset and do it again. To make things harder, Hoffman ordered the sub to stay at deep dive level. Under immense pressure, sailors lost balance, fumbling at their controls. One torpedo nearly slammed into the bulkhead. They cursed him under their breath, calling him the real devil. But to please their captain, they pushed harder. At last, their time dropped to 3 minutes 53 seconds. Hearing that, the entire crew exhaled in relief. Just then, the radio operator received new orders from base. At full speed, they'd reach the assigned location in 20 hours. Tenstedt smirked, plenty of time for more training. Hoffman caught his tone and calmly replied, "The purpose of these drills is to test your limits under pressure. Without pressure, training means nothing." Hoffman then picked up the phone and announced to the entire crew that they would follow the latest command from headquarters, head west to intercept an Allied fleet. The crew erupted with excitement at the thought of real combat. After Hoffman left, Tenstedt temporarily took command. Ehrenberg tried to comfort him, saying Hoffman's strictness probably came from his father's influence, but Tenstedt didn't care. He sneered that Hoffman should be a true captain like his father, not just a man who bosses everyone around. Meanwhile, back at the naval base, a Gestapo security chief approached the commander, requesting a submarine for a top-secret, non-combat mission. The assignment came directly from the Minister of Propaganda. It was of the highest importance. The commander handed over a list of available U-boats, and the Gestapo officer immediately noticed U-612 under Hoffman's command. He specifically requested Hoffman for the mission. The commander objected, saying Hoffman was too young and inexperienced for such a task, but the Gestapo officer insisted the son of a war hero would not only be brave but also a perfect propaganda symbol. If the mission succeeded, it would be glorious. If it failed, they could simply blame his inexperience. Reluctantly, the commander agreed. Back at sea, Hoffman led his crew toward the target area. Through his binoculars, he spotted an Allied ship. Strangely, with no destroyer escort in sight, Hoffman asked Tenstedt how many German subs were in the area. Tenstedt replied there were 5 in total, including U-612. Dawn approached, and their cover of darkness was fading. Hoffman ordered full speed ahead to intercept and fire torpedoes 1 and 4. The crew sprang into action, flooding the launch tubes and making final adjustments. Peering through the periscope, Hoffman found the perfect angle and gave the command. 2 torpedoes shot forward into the depths. Just then, the lookout shouted that a destroyer was approaching. "Dive, dive now," Hoffman roared. Sirens blared as the crew rushed to the bow to add weight and accelerate the descent. The torpedo officer watched the stopwatch, counting the seconds since launch. 40 seconds, no detonation. The first torpedo had missed. 53 seconds, still nothing. "It's a dud," the sonar operator shouted. Furious, the crew scrambled to reload, but the radio operator burst in with urgent orders from base. Proceed at top speed to a classified location. They were also instructed to avoid combat at all costs and prioritize safety. Hoffman reluctantly ordered a ceasefire, infuriating Tenstedt. "We were wolves about to strike, and now we run," he barked. The other 5 subs were in formation, ready to attack, but Hoffman's tone was firm. "It's an order." As the crew withdrew from battle positions, frustration filled the air. The adrenaline had turned into disappointment. That night at dinner, Tenstedt openly challenged Hoffman in front of everyone, questioning the secrecy of their mission and the sudden withdrawal. Hoffman calmly replied, "My duty is to follow orders." Tenstead pressed on, asking what would happen if they pretended they never got the message. Hoffman mentioned the legendary Captain Preen of U-47, a war hero who defied orders and was executed after being captured. If everyone acts on their own, Hoffman said, the only result is failure. Hoffman then poured Tenstead a glass of whiskey, telling him that one day he'd get his own chance, but Tenstead, still seething, refused the drink, the tension between them growing ever deeper. At dawn, the submarine surfaced, the crew came out to survey the surroundings, and a moment later, Ehrenberg joined them. Hoffman greeted him warmly and learned that Ehrenberg had actually helped design and build the U-boat. This excited Hoffman. He saw him as a rare talent. Ehrenberg, in turn, admitted that while the intense training had made some sailors uneasy, time would eventually win them over. Soon, the U-boat reached its rendezvous point. In the distance, a German ship appeared. After exchanging recognition signals, Hoffman ordered full speed ahead. He left Tenstead in charge of refueling and boarded the other vessel himself. Meeting the other ship's captain, Hoffman was told that the mission was top secret. They must reach a specific location within 5 days. The captain handed him a sealed letter, instructing him that another vessel would meet them upon arrival with further orders. Everything must remain confidential, unrecorded in the ship's log, and under no circumstances should Hoffman engage in combat unless the mission's success was at stake. Perplexed, Hoffman asked what exactly the mission was. The man gave no answer, only signaled to his men. Moments later, an American named Samuel was brought forward. Hoffman realized this man was the cargo he was to escort. As Hoffman escorted Samuel back to the U-boat, the lookout suddenly shouted, 2 enemy aircraft, 2 o'clock. Hoffman immediately ordered the refueling to stop and everyone to return below deck. One sailor cut the fuel line and sealed the hatch, but before he could retreat, he was hit and fell overboard. His crewmates managed to pull him back just in time. Once everyone was back inside, Hoffman ordered an emergency dive. Watching Samuel trembling in fear, he said coldly, whoever you are, you'd better be worth what we just went through for you. Lacking medical supplies, the wounded sailor didn't survive. The crew held a somber burial at sea, silently watching his body sink into the depths. While Hoffman was away, Tenstead began stirring dissent, claiming that 2 German submarines had been sunk in the last battle, killing 100 men, all because Hoffman was too cowardly to fight. He went on, saying Hoffman wasn't leadership material and would have never become a captain if not for his father's reputation. The rumors spread quickly. Many began to believe Hoffman was cold-blooded, that he had once personally executed a subordinate with 2 bullets through the cheek. Within days, the crew's trust in him was shattered. Unaware of the tension brewing, Hoffman remained focused on navigation, discussing routes with Ehrenberg. His only concern was whether they could reach the rendezvous point on time. Ehrenberg said that as long as the power held and they made good time, it was technically possible. Hoffman nodded, preparing to climb to the observation deck. Before leaving, he told Ehrenberg to report immediately if anything unusual occurred. Meanwhile, Samuel wandered around trying to chat with the sailors. Tenstead caught him and barked for him to return to his seat. Samuel snapped back that Tenstead had no authority over him. Hoffman entered at that moment and said calmly, Samuel is my guest. He then invited the American to dine with him, an act that humiliated Tenstead even further. During dinner, after a few drinks, Samuel grew talkative. He said that when he first saw the design of the U-boat, he was stunned. Not only was it powered by advanced engines, but it also had highly sensitive radar. He called it Germany's final chance at victory. When everyone else had left, Samuel leaned closer with a sly grin and whispered, help me escape, and you'll be rich beyond measure. Hoffman stared at him coldly. I'm the captain of this boat, not your friend, he said. Samuel backed off, saying nothing more. The voyage continued. Hoffman climbed to the observation deck for inspection and overheard Tenstead telling the crew about the 2 lost submarines. Pretending to be informed, Hoffman calmly explained that reconnaissance subs were often detected and targeted. It was simply part of the risk they all faced. Back in the control room, Hoffman angrily confronted Tenstead, demanding to know why he'd hidden the loss of 2 submarines. Tenstead replied he thought Ehrenberg had already reported it. Hoffman warned him reporting was his responsibility, and failure to do so was insubordination. Tenstead clenched his fists, barely containing his anger. That night, Tenstead was on watch when he spotted an Allied destroyer. Out of spite toward Hoffman, he deliberately delayed raising the alarm until the ship was just 3,000 meters away, then he sounded the alert. The crew scrambled to battle stations. Through the periscope, Hoffman confirmed it was a small U.S. destroyer, and it had already spotted them. Adjusting his aim, he waited until the range dropped to 1,700 meters and shouted, "Fire torpedoes 1 and 2." The control room fell silent. Seconds later, cheers erupted. Both torpedoes hit their target. The enemy ship exploded and sank beneath the waves, but amid the celebration, disaster struck. A torpedo slipped loose, crushing a sailor's arm. Blood splattered everywhere as his screams echoed through the hull. To save his life, the crew made the horrific decision to amputate. They brought out a saw, and amid the man's agonized screams, his arm was severed. Unable to bear the sight, Samuel was taken to the observation deck by Hoffman. From above, Hoffman and Samuel watched as the American destroyer burned. Hoffman said coldly, "You can't stand outside this war forever." Below, sailors screamed, some burned alive, others drowned. In the end, none survived. Samuel's expression twisted with guilt and dread. Returning to the control room, Hoffman asked for a status update. Ehrenberg reported they were entering a shipping corridor and would reach the rendezvous in 21 hours. Hoffman nodded and went to rest, coughing in the stifling heat. After Hoffman left, Ehrenberg approached Tenstead, urging him to support the captain, for everyone's sake. As they spoke, he noticed sweat beading on Tenstead's forehead. Concerned, he asked if Tenstead had been using something, but the man snapped, "Shut up." He admitted that years ago he'd been deemed unfit for service. Only Ehrenberg had believed in him, and he expected the same loyalty now. Elsewhere, Sailor Haber was beaten by his crewmates, who blamed him for the accident. Bloodied and betrayed, even by his closest friend, he realized how fragile the crew's unity had become. That night, Hoffman checked on the wounded sailor. The caretaker recalled another case. A crewmate once lost an arm, the wound rotted, and the stench filled the submarine. Hoffman cut him off, not wanting panic to spread. Looking at the injured man, he softly asked if he thought he'd make it home. Another sailor nearby whispered, "Captain, you're the one who needs care." Soon after, radar detected an American submarine nearby. Hoffman announced that he would transfer the wounded man to them for treatment. Becoming a prisoner of war, he said, was the best chance for survival. Hoffman approached the injured man and explained his plan. "Your battle is over now," he said quietly. The man looked at him and suddenly asked, "Is it true you killed your own subordinate?" The question froze Hoffman in place. He pressed for details and learned the rumor had spread among the crew. Hoffman replied calmly, "That's not true." Hoffman then confronted Tenstead, ordering him to avoid conflict with the Americans. Tenstead refused flatly, saying he didn't trust the enemy. Like wolves in the wild, he said, "A lone wolf gets eaten. It's nature's rule." Hoffman snapped, "Enough, do your duty." He stormed off, leaving Tenstead glaring after him. As the captain disappeared, Tenstead pulled a small vial from his pocket and took another hit of morphine. As the distance between the two submarines narrowed, both the American and German crews switched on their signal lights for identification. Hoffman brought the wounded sailor and Samuel, preparing to board a small boat to the U.S. sub for a prisoner exchange. Before leaving, Samuel turned toward Tenstead, remembering all the insults and humiliation of the past 2 days, and sneered, "Goodbye, you filthy Nazi." Enraged, Tenstead punched him, sending him overboard. Without hesitation, Hoffman, sick and feverish, dove into the sea to save him. Back on deck, Hoffman immediately stripped Tenstead of command and handed control to Ehrenberg. "If we're not back in 1 hour," he ordered, "sink the American sub." He then escorted Samuel and the wounded sailor to the U.S. submarine. Aboard the American sub, Hoffman was shocked to see that the prisoner being exchanged was none other than Captain Wrangel, the commander of the German U-boat sunk earlier in the story, and even more astonishing, Samuel's father was also aboard the vessel. Out of gratitude for saving his life, Samuel confessed everything. It was a trap orchestrated by his father. Their coordinates had already been transmitted to the U.S. military, and 2 bombers were en route, arriving in 45 minutes. Hoffman replied that he had instructed his crew, if he didn't return within an hour, this entire area would be destroyed. The Americans finally agreed. As long as Hoffman refrained from attacking, they would alter course to buy him time to escape. Once the deal was struck, Hoffman rushed Wrangel back to his own sub and ordered full speed ahead, leaving the trap zone. Wrangel, however, urged him to use this moment to strike back and sink the Americans, but Hoffman firmly refused. Their own men were still prisoners aboard that ship. Wrangel, furious, called Hoffman a coward. Hoffman's health rapidly deteriorated. He lay bedridden, feverish, coughing non-stop, likely pneumonia. The news spread through the submarine like wildfire, and morale plummeted. Meanwhile, Wrangel, the rescued prisoner, was assigned a bunk opposite Tenstead. Curious, he asked why Tenstead was no longer in command. The man replied bitterly that Hoffman had demoted him, calling the captain a disgrace to U-612. Wrangel nodded in agreement, equally disgusted by Hoffman's hesitation. The two quickly conspired. Wrangel reinstated Tenstead and began rallying support among the sailors. Approaching Ehrenberg, Tenstead declared that aside from Hoffman, he was the highest-ranking officer on board. Given Hoffman's condition, he was assuming full command, and anyone who opposed him would be branded a traitor. Ehrenberg tried to speak out, but when he turned around, no one stood behind him. The entire crew had shifted allegiance to Wrangel and Tenstead. With no choice left, Ehrenberg reluctantly complied. Wrangel immediately ordered the pursuit of the American sub to continue. Holding the armory keys, he locked up 2 dissenting sailors inside the torpedo room. When Hoffman awoke, he sensed something was wrong. Forcing himself out of bed, he demanded an explanation, only for Wrangel and Tenstedt to enter, announcing they had taken command of the U-boat. Shocked, Hoffman ordered their arrest, but no one moved. "Are you all insane? You'll be court-martialed for this," Hoffman shouted. Wrangel replied coldly, "I once admired your father, Captain, but you're nothing like him. You had the chance to destroy the enemy and ran away. You even handed your men to the Americans. That's unforgivable." Wrangel ordered Hoffman and his 2 loyal sailors to be exiled. They would be given a lifeboat and a small amount of food before being cast adrift. Hoffman was stunned. "Why are you doing this?" he cried. Wrangel replied coldly, "I'm the highest-ranking officer here. You'll do as I say." Hoffman pleaded for the release of the 2 sailors, insisting they were only following orders. Wrangel agreed to free them, but Hoffman himself would still be exiled. Before leaving, Hoffman stood tall and declared firmly, "Every day we live on the edge of death. Only obedience brings victory. What you're doing now is open treason." Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "I stand with Captain Hoffman. I'll go with him." Everyone turned. It was Haber, the sailor who'd once been beaten by his comrades. Refusing to side with the mutineers, he stepped forward with quiet courage. Haber told everyone that he once studied at a military academy and became an officer, but he quit, believing that true heroes came from submarines. Yet after joining this crew, filled with pride and patriotism, he realized most of the men here were nothing but filth, except Captain Hoffman, the only man he truly respected, and so he chose to follow him. Hoffman and Haber climbed into the lifeboat and drifted away from U-612 into the dark night. No one knew what awaited them beyond the waves. After Hoffman's exile, Wrangel officially took command of U-612. Soon, the sonar operator reported an American merchant vessel 2,500 meters ahead at bearing 350. Seeing himself as the leader of a wolf pack, Wrangel immediately ordered the hunt. Despite it being broad daylight, he ordered everyone to battle stations and prepared torpedoes 1 through 4. Staring through the periscope, Wrangel muttered calculations: torpedo speed 30, target 17, distance 300. Tenstedt warned that attacking this close was too dangerous, but Wrangel ignored him and gave the order to fire. The 2 torpedoes struck true. Cheers erupted through the submarine. The sailors shouted that Lady Luck had returned ever since Hoffman was gone. Moments later, the sonar picked up the sound of approaching propellers. Tenstedt warned nervously that they'd been detected. The Americans would soon strike back, but Wrangel, stubborn and intoxicated by victory, declared that wolves fight to the end. He ordered 2 more torpedoes fired, but both missed. Destroyer approaching, the sonar operator shouted. Panic swept through the crew. Tenstedt pleaded for a course change, but Wrangel sneered, "We're immortal." Then he calmly walked out of the control room, returning to his cabin, abandoning command entirely. Tenstedt froze in disbelief at the captain's sudden collapse. Realizing the danger, he shouted for all outer hatches to be sealed and ordered an emergency dive. The sailors rushed forward to add weight to the bow. By sheer luck, they descended before the enemy's strike. But before they could breathe, sonar picked up another destroyer closing in. No one spoke, only the pounding rhythm of propellers echoed through the depths. Outside, hell was approaching, while Wrangel lay motionless in bed, lost in delusions of heroic martyrdom. As the propeller noise grew deafening, the sonar operator reported that U.S. reinforcements had arrived. Everyone waited for Tenstedt to command, but he froze in terror. Seeing no choice, Ehrenberg shouted, "Dive to 150 meters, full power." A barrage of depth charges exploded around them, shaking the submarine violently. Flames burst from damaged panels as chaos erupted. Worse, Ehrenberg realized the sub was no longer responding. It kept sinking. "Everyone to the stern," he shouted, hoping to slow the descent, but it was useless. The gauges spun wildly, 220 meters, 230, 250, until U-612 plunged into darkness. When the sailors regained consciousness, there was only silence. They checked the gauges. The sub had hit the seabed 4,000 meters below. One man screamed, "We're finished." Ehrenberg tried to calm them. "We're just grounded, not dead. God's hand is holding us," he said, ordering emergency power to be activated and a full system check. But then disaster struck again. Water began seeping in. Sailors scrambled to seal the leaks, while Tenstedt, once the loudest voice of defiance, stood motionless, then turned away in silent defeat. Staggering into Wrangel's quarters, Tenstedt stared at the self-proclaimed hero lying motionless in bed. In a broken voice, he asked, "Why, you preached about heroism and now you just lie here waiting to die." Wrangel told Tenstedt that he hated the Americans to his very core. Their fighter planes had sunk his submarine, and as he drifted helplessly in the sea, he'd wanted to die, but the wolf within him refused to let go, driving him to survive only for revenge. While he ranted in hatred, the other sailors desperately fought to keep the dying vessel alive. Ehrenberg ordered his men to inspect every section of the sub. They discovered that the water pumps in sections 1 and 3 were still leaking, and most of the emergency systems had been destroyed in the fire. The internal pressure kept rising, already at 1070 bar. If it went higher, the entire hull would implode. A sailor warned that if carbon dioxide levels rose above 80%, everyone would lose consciousness and suffocate. It was already at 50%, meaning they had maybe 24 hours left. All eyes turned to Ehrenberg, the only man capable of making a life or death decision. After a moment of thought, Ehrenberg commanded the crew to check every valve and pipe for leaks, then restart the power generator, praying that God would grant them enough air to rise again. Under his direction, the crew worked tirelessly. They managed to seal all leaks and plug the vent holes. The pressure gauge finally stopped climbing, but when they checked the power line, they found the connectors burned and leaking poisonous chlorine gas. Those nearby began to cough, vomit, and struggle to breathe. The oxygen masks were all burned, only 2 remained. Without power, the engines couldn't run, and the sub couldn't surface. Ehrenberg asked for a volunteer. A big, strong sailor stepped forward, but the mechanic stopped him, saying he was too large for the narrow compartment, and volunteered himself instead. A radio operator also volunteered, but a friend stopped him, reminding him that his fiancée was still waiting for him back home. "Then let me go, no one's waiting for me." The 2 donned oxygen gear and entered the power compartment. But during repairs, the generator suddenly exploded. Acid from the batteries corroded their oxygen gear, and both men inhaled the toxic fumes, collapsing instantly. The carbon dioxide level neared its deadly peak. Everyone knew if the power wasn't fixed soon, they'd all perish. Ehrenberg made the grim decision: they would draw lots. Whoever drew the matchstick without a tip would go. One man begged to be excused, saying he had 2 children, but Ehrenberg replied coldly, "This is an order, no one is exempt." The room fell silent as each man picked a matchstick, their hands trembling. Then suddenly, Tenstedt stood up. To everyone's shock, he walked to the power bay, locked the door behind him, and began fixing the generator with his bare hands, without any protective gear. His coughing grew harsher as he fought to reconnect the wires. When the lights flickered on, he used his last strength to start the engine, then collapsed, motionless. Unlike Rangel, Tenstedt had redeemed himself through sacrifice. Outside, cheers erupted as the pressure gauge began to move. "Power's back," someone shouted. Ehrenberg commanded everyone to your stations, drain the ballast, reduce pressure. Under their combined effort, the pressure slowly dropped. 240 meters, 220, the needle climbed higher until U-612 finally broke through the surface. The crew fell silent, tears streaming down their faces as they gasped the first breath of open air. Ehrenberg, wearing safety goggles, opened the hatch, escaping death by a hair's breadth. The entire crew exhaled in relief, thanking God for granting them a second life. Rangel, still lying on his bunk, heard the cheers and let out a faint sigh. On the surface, the crew of U-612 stood in silence, honoring Tenstedt. They lowered his body into the sea and watched as it slowly sank beneath the waves. Without his sacrifice, none of them would still be breathing this air. Back inside, Ehrenberg ordered a full inspection. After the bombing, the fuel tanks were heavily damaged. The remaining supply would last only 1 day. Studying the map, he realized they were adrift in a vast ocean, without sunlight, unable to pinpoint their exact location. To make matters worse, the radio system was dead. The high-frequency transmitter still worked, but served no purpose. Only the sonar was functional, and they were still within an American shipping route, where one mistake could bring a destroyer down on them. After endless hardship, the crew's fighting spirit had crumbled. All they wanted was to go home, though home meant a court-martial. Then, the radio operator spoke up. Since the prisoner exchange, the ship's log hadn't been updated. If they all agreed to rewrite it, no one on land would ever know what really happened. The idea sparked a flicker of hope. Ehrenberg ordered the remaining power used to head southeast, hoping to encounter another German sub for refueling. During a meager meal, Ehrenberg suggested writing down everything that had happened with Hoffman and Haber. "Will that help us get home?" a sailor asked. "No," Ehrenberg replied, "but at least someone will pay for what they've done." Suddenly, the sonar operator reported a distress signal at 45 degrees. Ehrenberg ordered battle readiness. Soon, they spotted a drifting vessel, a Soviet warship, motionless and eerily silent, like a ghost ship in the open sea. With fuel running dangerously low, one sailor suggested boarding the Soviet ship for supplies. Ehrenberg asked if anyone had close combat experience, if anyone had ever killed a man, but silence filled the room. If there were survivors aboard, it could mean a deadly encounter. As hesitation spread through the crew, Rangel suddenly sat up. He claimed extensive close combat experience and fluency in Russian, volunteering to lead the boarding party, but his earlier cowardice, first vowing to ram the American destroyer, then backing out, had shattered their trust. Seeing their silence, Wrangel began his manipulation. He said they needed a real leader, someone who could steal fuel and get them home. Ehrenberg, he claimed, would betray them the first chance he got. His cunning words and commanding tone swayed the exhausted men. In the end, Wrangel convinced them to follow him aboard the Soviet ship, leaving Ehrenberg alone to guard U-612. Wrangel led the boarding team onto the Soviet vessel, weapons ready. They crept below deck, where they found 5 sailors and a Soviet captain. Wrangel demanded, "Why are you hiding down here?" The weary captain replied, "We're not hiding, we're waiting to die." He explained that his crew, drunk on vodka, had accidentally set the engine ablaze. They tried to extinguish it, but it was too late. The ship's engine was dead, and with it, their fate sealed. Wrangel came up with a plan. He offered to have his men repair the Soviet ship's engine in exchange for enough fuel to get home. The Soviets agreed, and Wrangel ordered 2 of his crew to head to the engine room while he stayed behind to keep watch. The 2 mechanics descended into the engine room. Dried streaks of blood stained the walls, unsettling them, but they pressed on toward the machinery. Meanwhile, 2 guards posted near the entrance heard strange noises down the corridor. Ignoring his partner's warning, one of them went to investigate and found a young woman tied beneath the floor grating, gagged and trembling. He set his gun aside, assuring her he meant no harm. When he removed the gag, she smiled through her tears, believing she was saved, but his expression darkened. He shoved the gag back in and began a vile, predatory act. Elsewhere, while speaking with the supposed Soviet captain, Wrangel noticed something was off. These men weren't sailors, they'd never fought a day in their lives. They were pirates posing as soldiers. Realizing the trap, Wrangel drew his gun and shot the man dead. A fierce firefight broke out. In the engine room, 1 mechanic was shot dead instantly. At the corridor's end, a pirate crept up behind the rapist sailor. Unaware of the danger, the man continued his vile act until a gunshot rang out. His comrade had killed the pirate, but the stray bullet also struck the girl, killing her instantly. After the gunfight, Wrangel seized all the Soviet fuel and fired a torpedo, blowing the ship to pieces. Returning to U-612 with his men, he declared that from now on, he alone would lead them safely back to Germany. On the journey home, the crew was elated. They believed that if they forged a flawless ship's log, they could escape punishment when they returned to port. In the fabricated log, they wrote that Hoffman died during the prisoner exchange, mortally wounded and dead within 24 hours. Haber perished in an underwater attack. Tenstedt, they claimed, had heroically sacrificed himself to restore power and save the crew. The log further described how U-612 had faced pirates in the North Sea. After its fuel tank was damaged, the crew sought help from another German vessel, only to encounter a Soviet ship. In the ensuing battle, their mechanics were killed in action, and the Soviet vessel was destroyed. Finally, they completed the falsified log. The entire crew agreed. From that day forward, no one would ever speak of what truly happened, not to a brother, not even to a dying grandmother. On the way back, everyone was overjoyed. Wrangel told Ehrenberg that back when he commanded his own crew, he had also stood on the deck like this, only then, he was tense and paranoid, fearing an air raid at any moment. Then, Wrangel recalled how he'd once been distracted by a dolphin gliding through the water, a moment of beauty that cost him everything. He hadn't seen the enemy planes coming. 43 men died because of his lapse. "You have to live for them," Ehrenberg told him quietly. The next day, U-612 slowly entered the naval base. The commander, already informed, came to greet them only to be stunned when Wrangel, thought to be dead, was the first to step off the sub, but Hoffman, the original captain, was nowhere to be found. "Where's Captain Hoffman?" the commander asked. Wrangel replied, "It's a long story," and handed him the ship's logbook. Outside, the crew waited anxiously. If things went well, they'd be hailed as heroes, if not, condemned as traitors. In the office, the commander read the log carefully, suspicion in his eyes. Wrangel said calmly, "Whatever you believe, the truth lies before you." Then, almost accusingly, he added, "Is it because all the real heroes are dead that you doubt us, sir?" The commander said nothing, his face unreadable. "What we wrote," Wrangel continued, "is the truth." The room went silent. The ticking clock was deafening. Wrangel's heartbeat echoed in his chest. After a tense pause, the commander silently gestured for him to leave and locked the logbook away in his safe. Wrangel stepped outside, finally relieved. He thanked the crew for their loyalty and wished them a pleasant leave. After a brief speech, he announced the team was disbanded. The sailors exhaled in collective relief. The scene shifted to a brightly lit office. Samuel, the American prisoner, sat reading a newspaper when his secretary entered, saying someone wanted to see him. "You owe this man a journey," she added cryptically. Curious, Samuel agreed to meet. When the visitor entered, Samuel froze, eyes wide. Standing before him was Captain Hoffman, the man everyone believed had perished at sea. No one knew how he had survived, and now that he had returned, would the truth finally surface? And that wraps up Season 1 of Das Boot. Do you want us to recap the next seasons? Drop a comment below. If enough of you ask, we will make it happen. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.